Hello everybody, welcome to the Event Industry News podcast. My name's James Dickson, and as ever wishing you a very good morning, afternoon or evening whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. And on today's show, I'm delighted to say it's a first timer for the Event Industry News podcast. Joining us today is Richard Twamley, Creative Director at Top Banana. Richard, very good morning to you.
Good morning, nice to meet you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us today. If you're watching the video of today's podcast, you can see the beautiful Shropshire countryside behind Richard this morning. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm bunkered down in my base of operations in Barnsley in South Yorkshire, and like everybody at the moment in late January 2021, we're making the best of the situation with homeschooling and everybody working from home under one roof at the moment. Richard, I'm sure you're no different to any of our other podcast listeners who are working in the same conditions.
Yeah, completely. But hopefully all three of them are caged. So unless we have any breakouts, we should be half an hour.
Brilliant. On with today's show, and as I said, Richard is a creative director at Top Banana, and rather than me rambling on about a company and trying to tell our listeners who they are, I always find it's a much more succinct process if we go straight to the people that know. So Richard, tell us a little bit about Top Banana and what you do.
I think we're a creative comms agency, and our provenance has always been in, just delivering great events. We have a wonderful group of people who probably got into the event industry because they love the vibe, they love the energy of putting on a live event, being with people. But we've also got, as well as all those amazing doers, we've got some good thinkers as well who perhaps live more by their ideas and just like producing great stuff for people. So we're a traditional agency in that sense, but we've got an awful lot of provenance in with some great global clients we've got. Part of the benefit of having global clients is that they have to reach across territories. So some of our history on streaming stuff put us in a really good position for what happened with this kind of virtual revolution.
I'm interested in the fact that you introduced yourself as a creative communications agency. Traditionally you had event agencies and you had comms agencies, people who did marketing. You'd even have separate agencies for your marketing and advertising, and then PR as well. And it's interesting now that you introduce yourself as creative communications. Is that because you encompass all of those things that I just mentioned essentially under one roof?
Yeah, exactly. It's a way of describing everything you've got in-house. I think, just like you, firstly, it's because it says that on the website, so I have to reiterate. Otherwise, I'm not on brand. But I think just like you, when I got into this industry, there was event managers, and you would work a lot on live events, and that would be considered the communication. These days, we're in a different space. So it's hopefully to reflect that. And obviously there's not many moments in time that we do. Everything seems to be joined together with a campaign, and that's why it's a comms agency.
Of course, and I suppose there's not little differentiation, that might be the wrong thing to say, but so many more brands see live events or an event of any kind now as an integral part of their marketing strategy, don't they? Whereas before, maybe going back 20 years, it was all very vertical and compartmentalized. You did your advertising and you might go to a trade show or a summit or a conference, but major brands now running their own events under their own brand is such a critical part of their brand awareness.
Yeah, and if you go back to what we were talking about before then, perhaps we weren't as sophisticated. There wasn't the interest in well-being. There certainly wasn't, businesses didn't have a people strategy as such. So you're looking at a need for people to, and call it what you will, creative comms, whatever it is, it's engagement, and everyone's a human being. People aren't different because they work for a different company. People are given permissions to do different things, and companies have different personality, and that's great, and that's perhaps where we come in. We kind of translate that and put it into an event, or like you say, an event will sit on a line of things happening that help get a message across or make people feel something, and that's where we come in. We're people who try and bring some emotion into it. We bring it to life.
Yeah. When over the last 10 months, when it comes to bringing those things to life, how has that landscape changed for some of the clients that you work with? You know, you don't have to name specific brands, but you mentioned that you're dealing with global brands, so no doubt it will be people that most of our readers have heard of at some point. How has the landscape changed for them?
I mean, regardless of, the size of the company or who the client is, again, the people who are going to be putting on the events or were given responsibility or it was thrown to, everyone was different, weren't they? Everyone had a different exposure to the technology. Everyone might have called it something different. And if they'd have done, I imagine what happened was everyone went straight into Google and looked in for whatever they thought the language was, webinar, whatever conference call.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're the same as me, but I've worked at agencies where a few years ago, a conference call was something that got wheeled in on a television and everyone sat there watching some poor IT guy try to put it together.
Yeah, or even just the phone hub that would sit in the middle of the desk that you could all speak into. You know, no video involved.
People, you're totally right, and that was a level of discomfort for people. But I think, do you know what? It's a perfect storm in a good way, because the landscape's changed in terms of culture and people and what they used to doing in their own homes, what they see on their television, what they do on their phone when they're on the bus, and also the live event. No one's used to sitting for 7 hours in the same chair with a one-way conversation. There's a different workforce. Even people like myself is a bit more dyed in the wool. We're not 9-to-5ers anymore. We're used to working anywhere, any place, on any device. We're much happier to share, and in fact, even the younger guys are much more willing to share. They're born to it, and they look for collaboration. It's not something they're asked to do. It's just something that comes naturally to them.
In terms of the one thing that strikes me as a change, certainly in the landscape, is that, you know, anybody who's watching this now can see quite clearly, and I'm not going to hide the fact, I'm underneath a cabin bed in my teenage son's bedroom. I have a couple of laptops, a webcam, a microphone, an iPad with some logos on it, but I haven't had to go out and buy anything and invest in it. This is all stuff that I had available, you know. Yeah. Most of us are armed now with smartphones, with laptops, with iPads, with 2, 3, 4, 5 devices available to us. And that, to me, is a big change in landscape in terms of what any organisation can do from a live event perspective. And as I was saying to somebody on a recent podcast, we're no longer constrained by this timeline of we have to do our event at this time every year or once every 6 months because there's travel and cost involved. I think one of the big things is it's added an element of flexibility. You can do it maybe quicker and more frequently.
Yeah, there's a few things to pick up there, isn't there? I think if you've got a certain budget and you're used to spending your money on an all-hands event, which is live and face-to-face, the attraction of a more frequent cadence when you're speaking to you're engaging with the people you work with and for, that's super attractive. It doesn't cost as much and you've got much more contact. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The other thing you were talking about with everybody having devices, I mean, we're quite savvy, aren't we? We look at screens all the day, and we probably don't get enough time looking away from our screens at the end of the day to balance it, but we're used to it. There is an audience out there who might, work on site, or there's a farm in the back. It's not as familiar to them. So we have to consider our audience when we're thinking about the kind of products and solutions we give them. Whether you have to choreograph the journey for some people, but like you say, the majority are so savvy with this. It's just people were waiting for this. I think if I was honest, and I think you're probably going to think the same thing, in the last 5 to 10 years, clients were looking for, how do I get more of that kind of stuff that I'm looking on at Netflix or that's on my Instagram feed, more of that kind of vibe into my event. And because you're spending all your money on a venue and getting people to the venue, that was really hard to achieve,
Yeah. It was always, I mean, going back maybe 7-8 years ago, when people were really looking at live streaming, I'm going to live stream my event as well as have people there, oh, there's an extra cost. I've got to bring in an extra camera crew. I've got to make sure that, there's a really good connection in there. We need to have some contingency. We need to have some redundancy in the connection. And it was all seen as that extra cost. Now, slowly but surely, it became integrated as venue connectivity got better and the value in having some sort of live stream content and what you could do with that on social media as well. I think that argument disappeared fairly rapidly, I think, in terms of that being a cost. And we were left, I suppose, in a fortunate position when all of this struck, that we had the infrastructure there, and also an accepted standard that, you know, live streaming and videoing and pushing stuff out via video links was part of the industry. And I think had we not reached that stage when this hit, the sort of transition back in spring last year could have been even more difficult.
Yeah, and I think you've raised a good point there. I think it was so familiar that there was a challenge with some of our clients. I think, well, everybody. Internally in businesses, you might already have, oh, we've got a system, we've got our proprietary brand, Webicon, whatever it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we need you? Where do you guys come in? How do you add value to our event and our experience? Well, it's exactly that. We can bring that experience to life, because you know that you got a certain amount of material, you've got an audience who need to watch it and keep them enthused, not looking at their phones unless they're looking at the phones to engage with the app. All those things had to happen, and for us to show, because there wasn't a lot of there wasn't a huge body of evidence out there for how great virtual was at the start. A lot of it, we're lucky, and I think having some amazing long-term relationships means that you've got that trust, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you're able to then develop products in tandem with your clients, develop what you've already got, and then you've got some evidential stuff to show others and build, and that kind of collaborative approach really worked for us. I think at the start, we launched a kind of something we tagged the Together project, which was about our industry, you know, the clients that we work for and with, the suppliers, the partners we have, you know, the close relationship with them and ourselves together, just to say, oh, we're in it. Let's not panic. This isn't going to be the end of the world. This is just a change in the way we do business.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I was going to ask you, did it take much persuasion to move them and convince them that virtual would work? But in many respects, they didn't really have a choice. It was no longer an option. Shall we try a virtual event this year as well as? There was no choice but to go down that route if they wanted to retain any form of contact with their audience.
Yeah, I think you've answered the question there exactly right. There was no choice. What were we going to do? What was your option? Unless you found a way to communicate quickly and to use whatever platform, because, you know, the platform is relevant, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's the content that you're putting on there and the way in which you're engaging with people. But you're right, no choice. Otherwise, there's no comms. There's no interaction. There's no face to face. There's no looking in the eyes of people without this. So yeah, I think, like I said, everyone was different. Those things that they Googled at the start, and when I'm talking about they, I mean everybody, it looked fairly flat and bland. And as an event professional, you were probably looking at a set of screens which had writing on, going, is this really going to replace all of the, you know, experience and memories and feeling and emotion that I get from what is, you know, human experience of meeting people in the same space? No chance. So that kind of the way we had to show and add to our proposition to make people understand that was a real thing. And you know, internally, I've touched on the people that work in our industry. They do it for the buzz. It's exciting. That's why we all joined. People. So to take that away is at first might seem scary. To start to bring it back, and in the interim in lockdown, between those two stages where we came out and went back in again, you started to see some of that hybridisation where people were back and enjoying the buzz of being alive, albeit socially distanced. You know, great. It was great.
Yeah. What position were you in when you had to, you know, adapt very, very quickly? Now, this all came about very, very suddenly, as we all know. You know, one day there were events, and the next day, bang, lockdown, everything cancelled. What the hell do we do? You know, it was as blunt a stop as we've ever come to as a country, not just as an industry. Was there much adaptation for you guys, or did you fundamentally have the bits and pieces in place to be able to service clients with what they wanted to do?
Yeah. So you're right. The tools were already in place. Some amazing people who work at the company who know what they're doing. So able to adapt and flex to something new, some incredible partners. And we were fortunate, like I guess a few other agencies in our position, that we had our own studio space and we could use that to host like physical events and broadcasts from there, because, you know, we are essentially making TV broadcasts most of the time now.
Yep.
We had space where we could do smaller vision mixing studios for like the smaller events, which are, you know, great for our clients. And then you know, for expansion and movement out of our own space, we have some great partners where, you know, the tech's there too. So being established helped, having a great roster of, you know, talented people helped. But it was still, you know, it was a panic at the start, like it was for everybody. You had to flex and change and work out where we're going to go.
Um, going back to sort of a different life, you know, I worked in publishing for several years, and that's sort of, I suppose, where my career started. You know, learning about marketing, communications, and working in the print publishing industry, and dealing with advertisers and what they were seeking to get out of it. And somebody told me a long time ago, you know, that the best time for major brands, particularly, to really push hard and invest in their brands and in their communications is in a downturn. So, did you experience a situation where actually some of the clients you're working with still wanted to invest in their communications, but suddenly they weren't presented with this significant cost of doing it in a real life space? You know, whilst there is a lot of tech and hardware involved to do it to a high standard, the cost of running a virtual event arguably is less than putting people in hotels, getting people from A to B, setting up venues, etc., etc. So were you faced with a good situation in some respects where some clients still had the budget and you could be quite creative with what you were going to do virtually?
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. I'd be really interested to see what you think about whether tech has more of a look in now that those budgets have freed up. And I think we'd normally expect to take cues from the other industries, the other media that everyone's using frequently. But what we saw, it was that the investment was so massive and the growth was so exponential in the tech and the evolution of great tools that you're almost seeing that bleed into other sectors as well. So yeah, the investment was there. It had to be, like you said, there was no choice because necessity is the mother of invention, right? You've got to
Yeah,
be.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'd be interested to see what you think. Because I know a lot of the events, some of the tech sometimes, just to some people, it's an amazing solution. To others, it's frivolous. What are your thoughts?
Um, I think a lot of this was sort of, we covered a lot of ground on the Event Tech Live show last year, and we were fortunate in many respects that Event Tech Live had no choice, like other events, to go virtual. You know, we were presented with that scenario, so we did it over 5 days, and it was brilliant because for 5 days I essentially got to talk to people about their experiences. Now, one thing that was interesting is that there was a feeling that after years of tech companies knocking on the doors of major organizers to say, we've got this great bit of tech, you know, we really think it could help you, and the major organizers almost keeping them at arm's length and
Yeah,
batting them away and straight batting them, saying, oh, maybe next year, maybe we'll trial you, maybe. Suddenly they all came knocking on the doors of tech companies demanding their tech to be up and running and ready for next week. And
is that
it's
technology?
sort of like a having a cake and eat it scenario in some respects. And I don't want to sort of put the boot in, but you know, I felt a bit for some of the tech companies who had been really trying hard to expand and offer it to the bigger organizers for a long period of time, who were suddenly faced with a scenario of either deliver or lose the biggest opportunity that has ever been presented to them. And I think that as a sort of a sub industry, people who specialize in delivering technology solutions of any kind for the event industry fulfilled an absolutely noble purpose last year, and you know, to a man, were pretty much, you know, working flat out for months.
Yeah, it was graft for people. I can totally see that. And I know you guys have spoken about the kind of technology versus budget equation and that balance. And I'll just be interested to see if you'd seen it swing. And like you say, it
Well,
has.
yeah, I mean, from what I'm aware, you know, suddenly, well, it goes back to the fact that there were no physical events, so all the costs associated with a physical event, a venue, the travel, the accommodation, the food, the fancy drinks receptions, you know, etc., etc., etc. You know, any company that still had that money to invest could suddenly put it into really good quality event tech, to make their virtual events as best as possible. Um,
And I think we're
and
seeing it now. You see, we can still provide like a vision mixed show, which is great, which means the presenters are super comfortable because there's someone next to them managing their content, feeding it at the right time, playing the videos, etc., through broadcast quality. And we can step up and use some of what were essentially our enhanced like event tools that were like, you know, your one-stop shop for your event organizer for reg, back end, all that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah.
and now you can buy your Golf or you can have your Bentley, but you are going to be left with some money to do the bespoke items. So I think there was a few things, wasn't you? We went back to talking about, were clients nervous? Was there a problem? Well, yes, because sometimes you're responsible for your speakers and your presenters as well.
Yeah.
Those
Did you
guys.
did you find when you were putting speakers and presenters, did you find that the lines of communication that you had to have with them and ahead of a virtual event were not just different, but in some respects even more detailed and more intense than at a live event? Because I find that at a live event, you email them and you say, you're speaking at 1 o'clock, arrive no later than 12:30, come to the speaker lounge, we'll brief you. We've got your presentation in advance. You give it to the AV guy. There's your lectern. There's your clicker, and away you go. You know, the briefing in advance is quite not minimal, but I found that the organisation for the speakers and the presenters was far more detailed.
Yeah, well, it's that classic, isn't it? Familiarity is going to breed contempt, because you not, and that's not in a negative way, but it's just that's just normal. When you're used to doing something, it's second nature to you. I think if you ask some of our live teams who are managing those jobs, they'd say yes. The expectation was that you just turn up again. Oh, I'll just come on the call a couple of minutes before. No, because that's a heart stopper for us. And also,
Yeah.
I think it's important for people to understand that, if you're comfortable in a group of friends, like with your mates, or you're on stage, if that's where you're comfortable, you're going to buzz off the feedback, the lols, the mega lols you're going to have on stage. You don't get that with everyone on mute. So you've got to try and find a way to re-engage and get those people, get the audience being part of your presentation. So that was something we worked closely. I mean, at the start, we just came up with like a way to emote, which was familiar to everybody, the likes and the loves, and they tend to break the internet for us now, which is wonderful. And then obviously as you develop those kind of products, your eyes are open to other ones, and what's missing from what happens. What do people like to do at a real event? Well, they like, if they are sitting at a table at an award ceremony, they want to chat while they're being shown content. Can you do that? Yeah. Well, let's see, and we'll make it, and now we can make.
Yeah. Let's try it. I mean, that's the beauty in some respects, is that we've had in the last 10 months, a let's try it attitude. And I think the one thing that you can always say about anybody who works in this industry, they could be crew that move stuff, AV techs, organisers, MOCs. We all like, I've never met anybody in this industry who doesn't like learning something new and who doesn't like challenging themselves to learn a new skill. I've learned everything that I know within the events industry, whatever that may be, on the job, by accident. I fell into it like a lot of people, and, I had a background in live music, which gave me a good start point, but everything else has been learnt on the job. And it's probably the same for you and your team. There was suddenly a challenge presented to learn new things, which you think, actually, long term, this is some extra strings to our bow.
There you go. You're exactly right. So, yeah, you do learn from failure and stuff, but sometimes you learn from, an opportunity. Perhaps it's not learning. It's more about the thing. When you want to go wild with your imagination, I'm a creative. I work in a creative studio with, creative people. Now, we're a creative business, but we make things, we use ideas, and we try and come up with stuff that's, different and interesting and inspires us and gets our clients inspired too. So that's not possible if you want to have a floating bunch of grapes with some screens on at a live event. But now, if you want to design that floating bunch of grapes in 3D and have it spinning and stuff, that's affordable, because that's part of it. So what's happened is, for our guys, they can go mad with their imagination and create something that's out there, but also like better reflects the brand, because all the content you see from a brand, that goes onto TV and on their Insta feeds is beautiful, and it's 3D, it's artist created and driven, it's aesthetically pleasing. And that was something that, when you've got a large conference hall, is sometimes difficult to translate. But in the world that we're in now, it's TV screen. Why not? Why can't I see that same stuff?
Suddenly everybody's got the Match of the Day studio available to them.
There you go. And it presents its own problems as well, because sometimes you're left with a big green screen going, okay, that doesn't look right.
Yeah, and it's the first time we've ever had to brief people in advance. When it comes going back to speakers and presenters, briefing them about what to wear and what not to wear.
Yeah.
Not so much because we're using green screen, but in terms of just the quality of the feed. And I likened that organisational process more to doing the tech advance for a live music event, where you would speak to each individual artist or band and find out specifically what they were going to be using and how that differed from the previous person, and then you have to communicate that to your tech operators. And I found that it was actually a very similar process with a virtual event, because you might have to say to your tech operator, look, this guy's not using a proper microphone, he's just using the audio on there, so we may need to just work the EQ on his audio a little bit to beef up his voice, little things like that. You were finding you probably had to deal with people in a lot more detail based on what laptop they were using, what internet connection they may have, did they have headphones, did they not, what was the lighting like.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be one of those live guys that'll get laughed at. It's way north of my skill set. But you're absolutely right. There's a change. There's a difference.
So yeah, going back to what we were talking about earlier, Richard, with speakers and presenters, the experience that I had certainly last autumn with a couple of shows was that dealing with the speakers and presenters was more akin to doing the technical advancing for a music event, where you're dealing with all the different technical requirements and backline equipment requirements of bands and musical artists, and having to note specifically what each one needs, what they're going to bring. And it was the same for the presenters and the speakers. What laptop are they going to use? Do they have a separate microphone? Have they got headphones? All of that needed to be communicated in advance so that we could make any adjustments. And I don't know if you've sort of had those same experiences in dealing with people.
Yeah, and you know what? I wouldn't even try to comment on all the technical ins and outs, because it's way north of my skill set, and I'll get laughed at when I go back, when everyone sees it from work. But you're absolutely right, and you've also made a wider point there about the different experiences that people get and the nuances and subtleties that come with using technology. Because when you boil it down, you've got, whether your event is virtual or hybrid, this is just an evolution of language, really, and the way we use words to describe what's an event. They're the same.
Yeah.
Why we came up with virtually the same, really, because it is, there's a uniformity, people and screens, but the experience will be different for you watching. Like if you're at a football match, it's different to watching it on the TV. The sights and the sounds and the smells and the audio, all that is very different, and you have to cater for that when you think about the streams of content you're delivering for your audience. Are you making it great for the people who are there and delivering it? And are there a small group of people watching? And what's it like for the people who are just watching with their tech at home? We have many of our clients who have not a disparate, but a spread out group who might have phones, but not access to like large screen devices. They don't sit in front of a laptop all day. They might, work in store, and their contribution is no less valuable. They might work in a coffee shop. These are jobs that are you still require the engagement, but the tools are different. So you have to really consider that when you're thinking that technology that you're talking about, the nuance. You've got to consider that when you're thinking about how to get to them.
You've just sort of prompted an analogy in my head, and I'll run with this and see if it makes any sense whatsoever. But I suddenly thought of Amazon when they came into the world of football, recently, in comparative terms recently. And when they got the rights to show some Premier League matches and people were able to watch those via their Amazon Prime account or via their Fire Sticks or whatever, there was a real shift in landscape, because how they did it was so different. They got so much positive feedback for all the interaction that they were able to deliver. They really rethought the process of broadcasting football via a TV screen and what they could do with it. And that to me shows that, yes, everyone would love to be in a stadium watching the football. The experience of watching it on TV is a totally different experience. But what Amazon did is reshape that and show how good it can be in that different scenario. And to me, that paints a very similar picture what we can do with events. We have these terms at the moment: hybrid, virtual, live event. An event is an event. One is watching the football in the stadium. One is watching it maybe via Amazon, and we've got that chance to sort of be Amazon in a way.
Yeah, there's definitely a parallel. I'm really happy with the analogy. I think you've done really well there. I think, but you're going to be deficient in some things, aren't you? Because there's no crowd there, and also Amazon, maybe they've used some techniques that we'd all be familiar with. We used to having bite-sized content. We used to having things change quickly. We used to having choice. That personalization element of how you listen, how you view, is great. And that's going to be one of the developments that you're going to see. I think the joined up experience for virtual audiences will change to reflect all the things we've talked about, and how people live. What this has done is it's exposed all of us to all that kind of media that we love, whether we're watching at home or streaming through our network provider for our television, the social stuff we get involved with and love, the time we spend on videos is getting shorter and shorter. The bite-sized content, the way we learn, the way we evolve and share is different. So maybe it was the right time, and all of this for our industry was a good thing in some ways. Now, I'm not saying that has been good for our industry. What I'm saying is the way in which it's evolved is, starting to reflect the way in which people actually want to live their lives and engage with learning it.
Yeah, and I don't think we shouldn't be afraid to say that out of this terrible situation that we've all lived in, good has come inevitably. I think you have to be open and admit that, and I don't think people should shy away from it, because it's not showing any sort of not ill feeling, but it's not showing a lack of empathy for anybody who's gone through this in any sort of negative way. What it's doing is accepting the fact that when we're faced with challenges, we find solutions. Like you said, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think when we do come out of this eventually, we'll look back and say, as dark a period as it was also a period of innovation, of people to be able to rethink and come up with new ideas and change how we're doing things.
Or even integrate some of those things that have struggled to get the look in. And you're right, it's been a dreadful time for some people. We've all got friends who have lost jobs, colleagues that are not working anymore, but the hope is that there's new opportunities that have grown from this. Those people who couldn't get a look in before now have a look in. The regular cadence of these events, if I say cadence again, I'll shoot myself. The frequency at which we're communicating, the closeness of relationships means there will be opportunities in the future. The greater, use of really creative products and content to bring things to life, the technology, everything's coming together to make, when we go back into the live arena, and we know, although it's not going to be exactly the same again, for some of our clients, virtual will never replace what they do. They're face-to-face people, whether that's sales or tactile, that's what they do. But the techniques we employ, now whether that's a client with some great new product development, okay, let's get it out to everybody. Let's look at those swatch fabrics. Let's smell that fragrance. Let's be involved with it. Let's get everybody, regardless of where they are, having a common experience. And if they can't, can we send something else out that makes it? But you're looking at trying to use all of the senses. It's an every sense experience, if you like.
Yeah, and like you said, you rightly point out that some, depending on the brand, depending on the company that you're working for, if they've got to put a physical product into somebody's hands in order for them to be able to really identify with what this new product is that brand are launching, you can't replace that. You can't send it down a TV screen. But I've seen some creative ways. We've all had shopping delivered from a major supermarket at some point over the lockdown, and I've seen more examples where my sort of weekly shop is delivered of free samples being put in there. Companies are clearly thinking, oh, hold on, more people are now getting home delivery, so we've got an opportunity to actually get stuff into those homes rather than them just relying on picking up a free sample in that shop. And to me, that's a great opportunity there. And for a brand, you could tie that in, get it into people's hands via a weekly shop and then run something via social media the following week to see if they've, picked up on it.
It's joining up, isn't it? And my hope is, we'd already started like a wellbeing revolution before we came into lockdown, but it's more about human experiences and understanding how we tick. And I think the age of behavioural science has always been around, but it will come more to the fore, because what are people's wants and needs? How do they tick? What's changed in the landscape? How have employees and colleagues, people, have we changed? What are we looking for now? And what do you get most results out of by engaging with us?
I've got to ask you a question about fatigue. As is often the way in our industry, terminology sort of creeps in as different things happen, and one thing that seems to be creeping in is this term digital fatigue, and whether or not we'll get tired of it. We've all had to spend so much, not maybe more time on our devices, because I think arguably most people, certainly this industry, are constantly checking their phones. They're always on a laptop or something. But this idea of actually talking to people like we are now constantly, are we going to get tired of it? Is it something that we need to bear in mind, and do we need to sort of have some plans in place so that if that fatigue does set in, we can shift a little bit?
It's a thing. It's definitely a thing. And we both know that when you have a conversation with someone, you get a half an hour or an hour slot, people's eyes will be flicking because they know they've got to do their job on the side as well. You'll start to see their faces light up as their email screen opens, or you'll start to just see people side messaging and stuff. That's human, that's normal, that's an evolution. The way we counteract that is to try and draw some techniques that you'd see in other media. You don't see a television program where you've got one person staring at the screen. You know, Patrick Moore's Sky at Night, I'm showing my age, isn't what you see anymore. You're going to see a magazine television show where there's pre-recorded and recorded content. There's a speed and a pace to the way it's delivered. There's interesting things happening. There's engagement with your audience. There's choreographed bits that pull people in who are remote and who are there in the studio. So you're looking at techniques which are designed to involve people. Are they doing something on their phone? Are they inputting? Have they been pre-selected to give you some feedback? That's the way of keeping people interested. Is the only way we're going to stop people drifting during the fatigue. Right, fatigue is definitely a thing.
Yeah, and of course Patrick Moore, legendary astronomer, or the games master, depending on how old you are, which generation you're from, all you teenagers out there.
That was a step change for him, wasn't it? With Dominic Diamond.
Yeah, exactly right. I saw it live. A-level physics. Went to watch went to watch Patrick Moore live, and all the teenagers want to shout, "As you're the games master! You're the games master!"
This is great content for the youngsters out there.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, yeah. And what I've never addressed really before, maybe this is the ideal time to do it, is it because of the situation that we're living in, you know, people may be listening to this now rather than sat at their desk in their office with their headphones on, you know, while they're doing some other work. They could be out walking their dog or doing their daily exercise. There might be 5 episodes deep into Bridgerton on Netflix. Who knows? So hello to anybody who's listening to this while they're doing something maybe that wouldn't be what they would usually be doing in normal circumstances, quote unquote. But hello to everybody, and well done to you all for surviving and for listening and doing whatever you're doing during these very, very, very strange times. Richard, it's been great to speak to you today. Thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for being so kind and patient.
No problem at all. There may be a couple of edits in here because such is life at the moment. I've had a couple of internet issues and things have dropped out. So if you hear a creative edit in this podcast at any point, we'll try and mask them. But 10 points if you can spot them. Tweet us at Event News Blog with the hashtag EIN podcast if you can spot the edit points in today's episode. They're nothing major, and it certainly hasn't affected the great conversation that we've had with Richard Twamley, creative director at Top Banana. I should also point out, and this is a blatant plug for other stuff that we're doing and other things that are afoot at the moment, Mr. Adam Parry, who you'll know as the editor of Event Industry News and host of the podcast in my absence over the last 10 months or so, has now launched the Event Tech Talk Show. You can find that particular podcast via the Event Tech Live channels. So if you search for Event Tech Live on any of the social media platforms, LinkedIn or on its website, you should be able to pick up a new podcast that Adam Parry's doing, talking to some of the movers and the shakers specifically in the tech industry. Well worth going over and checking that out. And we will continue to talk wider events through the Event Industry News podcast with people like Richard and many more besides in the coming weeks. So thanks very much for joining us today. Richard, before we wrap things up finally, as I said, you're the creative director at Top Banana. If people want to find you guys on the internet, what are the social media handles and how can they track you down?
Oh, you can get us across all the usual channels. I would say, just get in touch, ask us some questions. If you're not want to working with us right now, it might be that we can help you out with your project or your brief. We'd love to hear from you.
Final point. You've just prompted one final question. If you would indulge me just for a minute or so, have you found that in the last 10 months there has been a greater collaborative ethic amongst the industry and a willingness maybe to share information and ideas more freely than before as we all seek to try and find the best way through this?
Yeah, so let me answer that in 2 parts. I think firstly, internally, the big worry was, especially for us in the creative studio, maybe looking outwards in, not for us, that the collaboration would be worse. In fact, it's been better. The time to spend together on projects has just made the quality of it just grow so much, and it's been a real pleasure to get back to really enjoying doing what we do. But then the wider industry needs to be better at sharing. We need to be less secret about our stuff and holding stuff in. We can make lives better for clients and the people who work for the companies that we work for by just sharing a bit more of the information we've got and a bit more of the skills and expertise that we've learned over the last year.
Brilliant. Great way to wrap up today's episode. Thanks to everybody for tuning in to the Event Is Your News podcast today. Thanks again to Richard from Top Banana. My name is James Dickson, and I look forward to welcome you to the next episode of the podcast. See you soon, guys. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you.